Chris, what an honor to have you on the show with me today. In the event that somebody does not know who you are or has not heard your podcast before, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, your podcast, and your journey in orthodontics?
First off, Jill, I'm delighted to be on your podcast. Thank you so much. As I shared with you earlier, you have such a wonderful reputation. And this is, believe it or not, the first time we've been acquainted, even though we've both in the fields for a while. An honor to get to chat with you today.
Thank you.
A little bit about myself. I actually am a native of New Jersey. So I grew up in what's called Northern New Jersey, or the top half, close to New York City, in a town called Randolph, New Jersey. My father was an ophthalmologist before he retired, and my mom was stay at home, but she also had multiple careers. She started off as like a school teacher, and then she raised us. And then when we were a little bit older, she actually had a craft business, believe it or not. She was very entrepreneurial.
Love
and
that.
Then she went later on and actually was managing my dad's ophthalmology practice. I got to see a husband and wife working together from a child's perspective, which was quite interesting.
I bet.
But after high school, I actually went out of state. I went to North Carolina, which was pretty far from New Jersey. And I went to a school called Wake Forest, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I loved my time there. Smaller school, probably had about 4,000 undergrad, but made a lot of really good friends there. And I was painfully shy. I know some people might not believe that, but I was super awkward and shy in high school. And I think my time there at Wake Forest really helped me make some good friends and find my own personality a little bit. So that was really pivotal for me. And after I graduated from college, I went back to the state of New Jersey and went to my dad's alma mater, which was called at the time University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey. It's now part of the Rutgers system. So that's where I did my dental training in Newark. And from there, I applied to orthodontics. And believe it or not, I didn't get in my first time, Jill. So
wow, that we will talk about that, because I want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that for me was a little bit of a shock. I think in dental school to me was a means to an end. I think I always wanted to do ortho. I coasted a little bit, I'll be honest. I think I was trying to just use my intellect to get by. I often was the one that had the parties in dental school. So I was a popular guy.
You and I would have been really good friends.
Great, yeah. I probably should have spent more Fridays and Saturdays and weekends studying than I actually did. And when it came time to apply and I didn't get any interviews, that was devastating for me. This is something I wanted to do since high school, was to become an orthodontist. And I didn't really have a plan B at the time, which is interesting. You think that most people they'll apply here, but maybe they'll plan to do a general practice residency or something along those lines. I had like literally zero plans. So I had to scramble, and I got a general practice residency position at the same dental school in Newark. Did that 1-year program. I did really enjoy it. I think I liked a little bit more freedom they gave us in the residencies. Sure. And from there, I just was done with school. As you can imagine, it's a really long haul. And I wanted to get out, apply my knowledge, make a little bit of money. So I actually practiced general dentistry for 3 years.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then made your way back in.
Yeah, so I think the impetus for me to reapply to orthodontics, it was two things. One was the Great Recession of 2009. So you could see the writing on the wall. It was one of those things where I had quite a bit of work lined up, and slowly it was like, hey, things are slowing down. We have to cut back your days a little bit. And I thought about it. And at the time I was dating an orthodontist. She's like, Chris, you are so passionate about ortho. You need to reapply. And I think she probably believed in me a little bit more than I did at the time. And really, it's like at a time like that, what better thing to do than to invest in yourself, right, Jill? So I reapplied, and thankfully I got an opportunity to do the fellowship in Jacksonville University. This was 2009. And from there, did the fellowship, worked really hard. Let me say that again. Worked really hard. Got into the ortho residency program, which was a 2-year program there at Jacksonville, and the rest is history, so they say.
Oh, I love that. And I appreciate the fact that you were a little bit vulnerable with us, because I think it is one of those areas for all of us when we are moving forward in our lives that there will be a point with each of us that we're going to fail. I can think back when in my career and think of different things that I have done along the way and thought I had a direction, moving in one direction, and it just didn't work out the way I had hoped. And when I think about that, and I think about your story and others that I've heard, I really think it comes down to what do we do with that failure, whatever, however we equate that. And I think a lot of times in our industry, especially, we don't talk a lot about that. I think you're on the doctor side of this, I'm on the consulting side of it. I think so many times we get caught in that cycle of looking at everybody through the social lens and thinking, oh gosh, they're so successful. It just comes easy for them. They've always had the golden spoon in their mouth or whatever. And I believe, and you're a perfect example of this, that for the most part, it's not that easy for most of us. We may make it look easy out there socially, but I would say a lot of times, many of us are struggling and have struggled and had some pretty pivotal points in our lives as we've went along.
Yeah, I think success, I'm sorry to jump in there, Jill, but I think success can be attributed to three things, right? There's luck, which sometimes is a factor, there's talent, and then there's hard work and hustle. And that was, for me, it wasn't necessarily there at first. And so I think going through that made me really learn that I'm going to have to really put some hard work in. And since then, that really just helped me discover my drive.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm curious and you've had a couple times where, not only this, but I know you've also at different points had other things where you could say, I got kicked back before I was able to move forward. But I'm curious, what did you do? If there's a doc out there, maybe that's listening and this is really hitting home. I've been feeling a little defeated lately, or I just don't feel like things are moving the way I had hoped. Did you have any tools that you put in place or that you have learned over the years to help you move forward?
Jill, I think the biggest thing is what we're doing right now, just like not being afraid to talk about it and to share that with friends and family, because failure is normal. You learn from failure. I think it's actually a good thing because if we were successful all the time, it wouldn't mean a whole lot to us. So it is important to talk about it and don't beat yourself up about it would be my advice. It's normal, and be able to talk about it, confide in people, and you'll find that you're not alone in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. So as you have taken all of this in stride, I know one of the things that you have done is you have invented, you've been an inventor, you're a podcaster, you're a successful orthodontist. And I know that you really have enjoyed and talk a lot about digital workflow in ortho and really being super efficient in your orthodontic practices and really trying to help other doctors in that as well. I'm wondering if you could talk about that for us. I know that's a passion of yours, especially from a younger doctor perspective. So if you were talking, we got a lot of docs that are newer docs that are listening. And one of the things that I talk a lot about with them when we're getting started in practices is if we can work on our digital modalities right from the beginning and we can work on our workflows and you can really work on getting those systems in place in your office, I believe that really helps them set the foundation for how well that they're going to do. And I would love it if you would talk a little bit about that and maybe your journey as you have perfected, what you are doing and as you are coaching other doctors out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we talk about frequently on my podcast is the digital workflow in orthodontics and innovation in general. But it's something I've been very passionate about, Jill, and I've been an Invisalign provider since 2007. So that probably was most of as orthodontists, our first exposure to this quote unquote digital orthodontics, right? With the scanning and then being able to design the smile and the bite in the computer. More recently, with some of the newer products that are out there, it's to me been completely revolutionary is to use some of these newer customized appliances. And in my practice, we use Light Force and we also use KLO and custom braces. And a lot of people are confused why I use both. And to me, it's really simple, Jill. Some people want clear braces and some want metal braces.
Yeah.
And it's just that simple. I know some doctors just want to go with one ecosystem or the other, but I like to give people options.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to have too many options on your menu because then people come in and they can't decide what they want. But for us, for our practice, we have aligners, which we use Invisalign, clear braces, light force, metal braces, KLON.
Yeah.
Now, since we started doing that, KLON has actually come out with a clear line, which I heard is pretty good, but we still really like the light force system in our practice.
Yeah.
But you touched on something earlier that I do want to circle back to, if you don't mind, that with the young docs that you felt like it's really important for them to learn now. And, you know, the best time to learn something, to work out your systems, and you know this, Jill, is when you have the time, because when you're too busy, you're on the hamster wheel, you're trying to, you know, not get behind and keep up with your work. You're not creative in terms of your systems and coming up with new things. You need time to be able to flush that out. In fact, in our practice, we just brought on a fantastic new doctor who's really helping us with coming up with a digital coordinator who basically is one of our assistants who's going to help us with some of this digital quote unquote homework and doing the initial setups for us. Because one of the downsides sometimes of going to a digital workflow is then you have all this homework on the back end, which tends to go to at night or on the weekends. And these are all systems that you have to work out in your office. And I think there's no better time to do it than when you have the available time.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And that is something in any of my docs that are listening, they're like, yeah, I heard this one from Jill before. I say it all the time. There is like exactly what you said. There's never a better time to work on your digital workflows than when you're slower. And also, a lot of times you aren't going to have team members that are bucking the system either because they're learning right along with you. So, and I always feel like if you can get the systems in place, even if later on you decide to switch up a system, the workflow is the same. It's just maybe the program that you're working in that you're switching up or whatnot. So it's usually a much easier, I think, change than when we went from fixed brackets to something totally different that we're designing online or whatnot. And I'm curious, as you guys brought this new technology in and really embraced it, being an existing practice, what were some of if you were to give somebody advice and they're like, all right, I've been one of those docs that's been sitting on the sidelines saying, okay, I'm going to let this, there's always like the jump in really quick and the ones that are going to sit and wait and evaluate. And then the ones that are like, I'm good where I'm at. But if we've got some of those that are listening that are saying, okay, if I wanted to move more in that direction, do you have suggestions for existing practices and maybe some of the steps that they should take or that you would suggest if they are saying, all right, it's time, I'm ready to start making some changes?
Yeah, I think step one is really just to try to educate yourself. And that might be through going to conferences about it, podcasts, webinars, things of that nature, just to learn more about it first. To be honest, Jill, even though people think of myself as an innovator, we were an early adopter of some of this technology, but we didn't go fully digital until I would say maybe 6 months ago. So we did 2 years of dabbling with it, where we did some cases with light force, some with KLON, trying to figure all this out, but we didn't fully commit at first. And you don't have to fully commit and jump head first into it. No one said you had to do it. Another piece of advice would be maybe try some cases and see how it goes. See if you like it. It might not be for you. You might not like the finishes, or you might not like the digital quote unquote homework and treatment planning that comes with it. So you don't have to completely abandon the analog workflow to try out the digital one.
Yeah, good advice. And I always try and advise my docs, do it one thing at a time if you are going to do it. If you're going to choose aligners, start with aligners first. And if you're going to try out a couple to determine which one you like, do that, determine that, then start to move. And then, okay, now we've got that process figured out. All right, now we're going to evaluate a custom bracket. All right, choose which one you're going to do, or dabble with each of them a little bit, like you're saying, until you decide on it and then go. But I think what we run into so many times is we get in there and it's, oh, I'm just going to change everything. And then your practice is in constant change, constant turmoil. The team feels frustrated. You feel frustrated. And I'm going to bet that even the whole reason that you're doing this for efficiency, for trying to maybe lessen the amount of appointments a patient has to have, it loses its luster and really doesn't achieve anything if you can't really get those systems in place.
No, I think that's a great point. And to piggyback on what you were saying as well, is you really want to think through these things and talk about it with your team before you come in, and just, you don't want to come in the next day and say, okay, we're going all digital, right? I see this with the new doctor, who is wonderful, by the way. His name is Dr. Bilal Hedaya, who's joining us at Blue Wave Orthodontics. But this is exactly how I was out of residency, was that you had an idea like, okay, let's just start doing it. But you really do need to talk about it with everyone, make sure everyone's on board. The more you think through things, you're going to realize like, maybe we're going to change this or change that, or to implement it, we might have to do something else with it. But certainly it's great to get things going, and you can go in and make that conviction known. But before you really commit to it, I think really think it through and talk it through with your team.
Yeah. Yeah. I use the analogy of, first we're going to dip our toes in, and then we're going to wade in. And then when we're ready, we'll dive in. We'll dive off the diving board. Perfect. You got to start slow, and that's okay. And I loved it that you said you guys took your time moving in that direction. And I think whether it's an existing or a startup, if you think about a startup, we're taking our time in that year to really work on getting our workflow in place. We just have the beauty of deciding from the very beginning. There's no bad habits. There's nothing in place. We just get to determine what we're doing right from the beginning. Where existing, I feel, is always just a little bit tougher.
It's a bigger ship to steer, as they say.
Yes, yes. So I'm curious if you will talk a little bit about you as an innovator and an inventor with the buttons that you have created, and just that journey. You know, what I have talked to so many orthodontists over the years. I've been doing this for a little over 30 years now. And I would say a fair amount of the docs that I talk to are creatives. You guys, yes, you're creating smiles and you love that, but there's always like this little itch that's out there where you just can't help yourselves. And you're like, I know I can make this better. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that with us and what you've been able to do in our space.
It's so funny you mentioned that, Jill, because it took me a while to figure out that was my sort of superpower, was creativity. And it's funny, you're absolutely right. There's so many orthodontists that really are tinkerers, or they like to think, what if? And for me, I came up with the product that I co-invented. I was an associate at the time in New Jersey. And I was working for a couple Invisalign practices that were top providers. And the one thing that I kept seeing was that patients were coming back in, and the various attachments that we were using to hook the rubber bands up for their Invisalign just kept coming off their teeth. In 2015, 2016, what we were using molar tubes and just bonding them at the gum line. We had the small little lingual buttons, which were like really tiny, and you can't really hook the rubber band up.
Yes.
Or we're using these other little gadgets called Kaplan hooks. And in my mind, like, all these products were created probably back, I don't know, in the 70s or 80s when braces came out, but they were meant for braces. They were never made for aligners.
Yeah.
I guess just the lens that I look through is, one day I just turned to my partner and I said, why isn't the button shaped to fit in the cutout like a puzzle piece? And that was just like very obvious. Maybe it was looking through it with different eyes, right?
Yes.
And that doctor who became my business partner on it, Dr. Rich Kay of Morristown, New Jersey, he said, Chris, that's a great idea. You really should patent it and do something with it. And I was like, yeah, I had no idea how to do any of that, Jill, to be honest. Weeks, if not months, went by. And every time I saw him or came into his practice, he said, Chris, you had that idea for this button that just fit in there perfectly, like a puzzle piece. He's like, what'd you do with that? And I said, Rich, I've been so busy working myself, because when I was an associate right out of school, I was probably seeing patients 6 days a week. Just,
I believe that. Yes, I believe it.
I thought that a piece of something is better than nothing. So one day I said, Rich, you know what? Let's just partner up on this and we can try to figure it out. So this, again, was probably around 2016. YouTube was out, but it was mostly like funny cat and baby videos at the time. It wasn't as informational as it is now. So we went to Amazon and we got this great book. And the name of the book was One Simple Idea by Stephen Keyes, Stephen with a PH. And it basically explained a very simple way to go about patenting your idea and then licensing your idea out.
Oh.
And I'm so grateful, Jill, I found this book, because the licensing model where you basically rent your intellectual property out to a company is so perfect for a practicing orthodontist.
Mm-hmm.
There have been quite a few orthodontists recently, and I'm sure you've seen them, that have left orthodontics almost entirely to focus on starting a company, which is great. And I definitely would encourage people to do that if that's their passion. But for me, I love orthodontics. I didn't want to give up the quote unquote day job. So this was a perfect model for me to have the company, which in my mind, it's their expertise to know how to make something, to know how to sell something, to handle the fulfillment, all that. Let them handle that. In exchange, I get a royalty for it.
Yeah.
Certainly, there was a lot of Shark Tank that I used to watch back in the day. Mr. Wonderful was not my favorite shark. I am a Damon John fan, for the record. But this is totally the Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, license it out play.
Yeah.
Once we had the idea, what we learned to do through the book and through this consulting sort of coaching company called Inventor is you can actually file a patent pending on your product for a very small amount of money. And you can actually even do that on your own, which we did. We wrote the provisional patent application on our own without going to an attorney. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to a patent attorney, except it's really expensive. Yeah. Yeah. As orthodontists, we probably could have afforded it. But a lot of times what happens with patents, and I forget the exact statistic, but so many patents are filed, but those inventions never become a reality. Mm-hmm. If you go to a patent attorney with an idea, they're probably going to help you patent it. They might not say, this isn't really a great idea. So the benefit of that provisional patent application is then you can shop your idea around, you can get feedback on your product, and you can see, is this a viable idea that someone is potentially interested in commercializing?
Oh, I love it. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I am sure I just had somebody go, and they probably already have their phone up and they're already ordering the book and maybe even calling Inventor to talk to them about an idea.
Yeah. And I'm happy to be a resource as well. Yeah. So it's such a great way, because I do have a lot of inventor doctors with ideas reach out to me. And a lot of times they say, okay, I have this non-disclosure agreement, which has an NDA, as we call them, and I'm going to try to get invisible. They might be working on a similar idea and they don't want to legally be responsible or accused of quote unquote stealing someone's idea. So there's really just not a lot of incentive for them to sign these NDAs. So what's great about the provisional patent is you can freely share that idea and your idea is still protected with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office.
Ah, I love it. That is definitely a pearl for any of my inventors out there that are listening. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so as you have brought that to fruition and to market, now you have the precision aligner button. Right?
Yeah, the precision aligner buttons is the product. We started with a company based out of New Jersey called Mid-Atlantic Ortho. We launched the product in 2018. And then around 2019, MAO got bought out by Dynaflex out of St. Louis. And we had a great experience with MAO and an even better experience with Dynaflex. They've been fantastic to work with, a great partner. Since we joined them, they actually came out with a clear version of the precision aligner button for anterior teeth. And most recently, we came out with a mini button. So some people think the button's too big, which... You know, if you feel like this button's too big, we now have a smaller version that still has the same great bond strength and stays on the tooth. So we got options. The reason I came up with that, I'm a big Steve Jobs fan. And I think of the iPad and the iPad mini or the iPhone Max. So we just took it and scaled it a little bit. And the great thing about that is you don't have to file new patents. So it's a great thing.
I love that. What an inspiration you are. So on top of being an inventor, also you do podcasting. And I'm just curious, what got you into podcasting? I know what got me into it. What was your catalyst for saying, I think I want to get out there and spend a lot of my free time giving advice and talking to people?
I think a lot of it came from the fact that as an associate, I was doing a lot of commuting and driving, and
Mm-hmm.
especially in New Jersey where there's traffic everywhere and stuck in the car. So one of my favorite things, besides I'm a huge fan of music, as most people know, but I love podcasts too. And so I listened to the original, I'm sure you heard of Elevate Orthodontics podcast with Dr. Lance Miller.
Yep.
I love Dr. Kyle Fagala's podcast, The Digital Orthodontist, Glenn Krieger's podcast, Orthopreneurs. All those were really like the orthodontic podcasts out there. And I think what made me start mine was, like you mentioned, I love the word curiosity, right? So being a curious person, I knew how I came up with my product idea and how I brought it to market, but I was very curious how other people were doing the same. And what we've seen in the last 5 years, Jill, in our profession is that sort of like for orthodontist by orthodontist movement, where we've really tried to come up with a lot of the ideas on our own as orthodontists instead of relying on the companies to create things and bring them to us. And so I saw others like Alfred Griffin with Lightforce and John Pham with Embrace and Brandon Owen with KLO and Adam Schulhoff with Grid, many.
Yep.
And so I was so curious, like how they came up with their idea and what they did to bring it to market. So that was really the genesis of the podcast. A lot of the other podcasts that were out there, which I mentioned, which I loved, a lot of them I think were more on like team culture and mindset and positivity. And I love all that stuff too. Great, but they weren't having as many of the inventor types on the podcast.
Yes.
So I thought that would be my niche. And as we were chatting before, at the time, really the only option for podcasting was like Zoom or Skype. And so the audio quality suffered a little bit. And being a music aficionado, the sound quality was always like a big thing for me.
You're like,
so
unacceptable.
I brightly decided, unacceptable, Jill. So I brightly decided, this was like right before COVID, like I'm going to do an in-person podcast. And that was just like a little bit crazy during COVID times. And many smarter people than me told me I should pivot and just start doing a Zoom podcast. And for whatever reason, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. There already are plenty of Zoom podcasts.
Yes.
So literally, God bless my wife, she put up with this, but we would road trip to the guests. So we would go on the weekend and drive to North Carolina, or we went to see Dr. David Sarver in Birmingham. And we recorded these podcasts. This was before vaccines, 6 feet apart, outdoors, but we got to be in person. And it was like so special to be in person during those times. If you remember when we were all isolated during quarantine.
For sure. Yes.
That I think people, it just resonated with people. They're like, what? These people are together. They're like in the same space and they're having a cocktail and they're laughing and they're having a good time. And I think that sort of led to a lot of the popularity of the podcast, was just that it was very different than what else was out there.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I so agree with you. There is a lot of amazing podcasts out there, and each of us have our own vision for what we're doing and how we're doing it. And when I look at it, it's just how do we continue to share our knowledge and share our experience and highlight other people's knowledge and experience. To me, that is the most exciting. We are so blessed in our industry to be around a lot of really smart people who have just done some really amazing things.
Yeah. The podcast for me it's almost a secondary residency, just in terms of being able to talk to so many luminaries of the profession and just be a sponge and ask them questions. And I've gotten so much out of it myself. So it really is incredible. And Jill, I'm sure you feel the same way, that, I would encourage other people, if there's anyone else that thinking about starting a podcast, I think it's great. I don't want to discourage people by any means.
Agreed.
I think there can be many voices out there and everyone's going to have their unique take on the medium of podcasting. I know you do a lot of video content, which is great. I do hardly any video. Mine is mostly audio. And there's so many different ways or angles you can take a quote unquote podcast. And it's just such a cool medium to be involved with. And I think if there's people out there thinking about doing it, just consider it. It's pretty awesome.
I agree. There's plenty of room, and there's way more smart people out there than we can ever all get to and talk to.
100%. I often think my biggest regret whenever I stop doing this is there's just so many people that I haven't had a chance to talk to. Because I mentioned this on my last podcast with Dr. Sheldon Salins. I really believe everybody has a story. And even orthodontists that aren't prominent and on the speaking circuit, that maybe you don't even know, they probably have an incredible story of their life and their journey. And I wish I could have a chance to talk with everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. Between the two of us, we'll do our best, right?
Yes. Here's to that. But I was
Yeah.
so excited when you came out with your podcast, which I believe was what, about a year ago?
A year,
Or has it
about a
been
year and a
longer?
half. Yep, just about a year and a half now.
Year and a half?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I am a big fan of yours. I listen regularly. I
You.
just heard Janelle Baum on her podcast and I learned a lot of great stuff. So great job to you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. And likewise, I listen to yours as well. I
Thank
think
you.
we're always able to, and for everybody that you named, I'm always got my cue of, all right, because we all, I think, also launch at different times. So it's like, all right, here's who's next in my queue and what are they
Yep.
talking about? And they're an eternal learner. I am just always consuming, whether
That's
it's
amazing.
Audible books, whether it's podcasts. For me, that's my creative escape, is being able to just get my brain in a different space and think about something differently and have somebody else tell me whatever it is. I love that.
No, I love it. And Jill, I have to say kudos to you for doing the weekly podcast. That to me just blows my mind.
It's a lot of work, but I love it. And I'm not planning on stopping anytime soon. So as we wrap up, this has been such a joy to have you on the show. And I would just
Thank you,
love
Jill.
it if somebody wants to reach out to you. Maybe they've got a question about, maybe they've got an idea and they're like, really? He said I could reach out. He could give me some ideas on bringing an idea to the market. Or maybe they want to talk to you about your show. Or maybe it's even somebody who's just saying, I think Chris might be a safe space. If I needed to just talk to somebody about something I'm going through, I know he's been through things in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for all of us, I would bet all of us would be a safe space. But if they just want to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. The best way, I would say, my email is drcetta, drceta @gmail.com. Social media is another great, let me try that again. Social media is another great way. I'm on Facebook, Instagram at Dr. Cetta, LinkedIn, and I guess it's Twitter, X, whatever they're calling that now.
I know it.
You can message me through any of those platforms. I will say I'm really bad with LinkedIn messaging just because I feel like I get spammed on there like constantly.
Yes.
So I almost don't even check them.
Yeah.
Probably Facebook Messenger or Instagram Messenger would be the best way otherwise of getting a hold of me. But happy to chat with anyone, whether it's they're going through some struggles or they are a hopeful inventor or they want to talk about microphones and podcasting or maybe music or cocktails or some of my many other interests. Always happy to chat.
I love it. I love it. All right. As we finish up, I know you've listened to the podcast before, but one of the things
Yes,
I like to do is finish us up with the speed round. So are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right.
Prepared, yes.
Okay.
Let's
Coffee
do
or
this.
tea?
Coffee. I am a cold brew aficionado. I love cold brew
I
coffee.
am black and hot. I'm a black hot coffee all the time.
You
You
like
can even
drip
hook it up.
coffee or like French press or anything?
It doesn't matter as long as it's
matter. Okay.
fresh. That is my thing. I think I love French presses, but I'm a little impatient, so I don't always take the time to, even though it tastes
Let
so
it
much
steep.
better. Maybe if we're at a bed and breakfast or something, and all I'm doing is lounging, then I'll wait for it. How about a favorite book?
Favorite book, Jill, I have to admit, I haven't been reading a lot recently, but my favorite book, I mentioned Steve Jobs before. I loved his biography by Walter Isaacson. It was very interesting. Not exactly the person who I thought he was, because you learned that he was like not really the best dad and sort of a jerk. But that being said, what a genius. To me, I do have lots of other personal development books I like and leadership books, but that's one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's great. How about a favorite outdoor activity?
Living in Florida, we have lots of them. I recently have taken up bike riding, which is pretty cool. But I got to say, because I want to include my wife here, a sunset walk on the beach as a favorite outdoor activity.
Oh, I love that. That would be like me
Which
in
is
the
great
mountains.
in Florida.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
bet. Yeah. How about if there's one thing you could be remembered for, what would you want that to be?
I've given up on having a hit music album. Probably not going to happen in my lifetime, but maybe just for being classy. I'll say that. And hopefully I'm still working on that, but hopefully I'll be remembered for that.
Oh, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. And then if you want to finish it off, best piece of advice you've ever received.
Ooh, I have to say lots of great advice throughout my career, but we were mentioning Stephen Key, the inventor before. And it's funny, my first ever podcast was Steve and I was on like his YouTube channel. And he said, Chris, you're really good at this, and you could potentially be like on a television morning show or something like that. And he gave me the advice. He said, rather than learning to talk about yourself, learn to shine a light on others. And I thought that was like really a great piece of advice. And he said it actually 3 times, thank goodness, because I'm a slow learner. So it like stuck with me. And that's actually how we came up with the name for this podcast right here, the Illuminate Podcast, was just learning to shine a light on others.
Yeah. So. And what a great piece of advice, because you can really use that in anything, right? Whether you're out at a party or out meeting somebody for the first time or interviewing a guest. What a great piece of advice. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy work week to be on Hey Docs with me. And I look forward to having you on again. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jill. Really appreciate you having me. And thank you for everything you do for the orthodontic profession.
Yes, absolutely.
It was an honor to be on today.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
All
Cheers.
right. See you later.
Bye.
Okay.